A single father was tricked into a blind date with a blind girl, and what she said left him in tears and changed their lives forever. A story of love and overcoming that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The deafening sound of jackhammers echoed through the construction site on Riverside Drive when David Johnson's phone rang for the fifth consecutive time. At 42, the civil engineer had developed an almost supernatural ability to ignore distractions when focused on structural calculations, but his colleague's insistence was starting to irritate him. With his yellow hard hat slipping slightly down his sweaty forehead, he finally answered the call. "David, man, you can't stay buried in these projects forever." Mark's excited voice, an architect and his project partner for over a decade, had that conspiratorial tone that always signaled trouble. "It's summer festival time, dude. The whole city is celebrating, and you've turned into a hermit." David sighed, gazing at the New York skyline that stretched beyond the river. The colorful banners, hanging from the buildings around, created a cheerful contrast to the gray concrete, but he barely noticed them. "Mark, you know I don't have time for this. Emma has a school presentation tomorrow, and I still need to finish this report before—" "Exactly!" Mark interrupted him, and David could hear other voices in the background. Probably Frank and Kyle, the other partners in the office. "That's why we've set up something special for you. A surprise." The word surprise in Mark's vocabulary always meant complication. David knew that group all too well. Ever since his wife Sarah had left for Paris 3 years ago, claiming she needed to find herself artistically, his friends had not stopped trying to convince him to get back in the game. But David wasn't interested in games. He had an 8-year-old daughter to raise alone and a business to run. "No, Mark. Whatever you guys are planning, the answer is no." He walked to the edge of the site where he could see the intense traffic on Riverside Drive. Delivery trucks vied for space with private cars, creating an urban symphony that had become the soundtrack of his life in recent years. "Dude, you don't understand. It's all set." Frank's voice came closer to the phone. "We found the perfect woman for you. A teacher, smart, elegant, exactly your type." "My type?" David laughed bitterly. "You guys don't even know what my type is. And even if you did, I don't need you organizing my love life." "Oh, come on, David." Now it was Kyle speaking. "When was the last time you went out with someone? When was the last time you had fun? Your daughter needs to see her dad living, not just surviving." The mention of Emma made him hesitate. It was true that she had made some comments about how nice it would be if he had a girlfriend, like some of her friends' parents. But David had built a perfect routine for the two of them. Work, school, park on Sundays, movies on Saturdays. They didn't need anyone else. "Listen," Mark continued, "it's just a coffee. An hour, 2 at most. On 8th Avenue at that place you like, cafe with conversation. Today at 5 p.m. If it doesn't work out, you'll never hear us mention it again." David looked at the clock. It was 2 p.m. Technically, he could finish the work in time, pick Emma up from school, and take her to his mother's house, where she usually stayed when he had commitments. But something about their insistence bothered him. "What kind of teacher?" he asked, against his better judgment. "Music. She teaches at a specialized school in Brooklyn. Apparently she's amazing with kids." Mark's voice carried a barely concealed satisfaction. "Who knows? Maybe she's exactly what you need." David closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Since Sarah left, he had become both the father and mother to Emma, the provider and caregiver, the protector and counselor. There was no emotional energy left for anything else. "Fine," he finally said, "but if this is some stupid prank of yours—" "Prank?" Mark sounded genuinely offended. "Dude, we just want to see you happy. It's been 3 years, David. 3 years since you've lived, just existed." After hanging up, David stood still for a few minutes, watching the city's movement. New York buzzed around him with all its chaotic energy and infinite possibilities, but he felt disconnected from it all. It was as if he were watching life happen through a bulletproof window. At 4:30, after a quick shower in the construction site locker room and a hurried change of clothes, David parked his silver pickup in front of his mother's apartment in Greenwich Village. Grandma Helen, at 67, maintained her same tireless energy, greeting Emma with her usual enthusiasm. "Dad, where are you going all dressed up?" Emma asked, noticing the light blue dress shirt he had chosen, one of the few pieces that Sarah hadn't taken with her. "Just a work meeting, Princess. I'll be back to pick you up after dinner." "A work meeting that needs cologne?" The girl raised her eyebrows with an expression that painfully reminded him of her mother. "Grandma Helen, Dad is lying." Grandma Helen laughed, adjusting her floral apron. "Leave your dad alone, Emma. Every man deserves a chance to be happy." On the way to 8th Avenue, David wondered what exactly he was doing. The typical Friday traffic allowed his mind to create catastrophic scenarios. What if the woman was completely unsuitable? What if she found out he was a single father and ran away? What if cafe with conversation was busy, with the sidewalk tables occupied? David chose a table near the window and checked his phone. 5:10 in the afternoon. Mark had said she would wear a green blouse and carry a brown folder. He examined every woman passing by, feeling ridiculous and inadequate. At 5:15 she appeared. She walked with a white cane, moving with surprising elegance through the busy sidewalk of 8th Avenue. The emerald green blouse accentuated her light brown skin, and her brown hair fell in natural waves over her shoulders. The brown folder was slung over her shoulder, and she paused occasionally, as if she were listening to something specific. David's stomach dropped. His friends had set him up on a blind date with a blind woman. The prank had finally revealed itself in all its cruelty. She entered the cafe and stood still for a few seconds near the entrance, clearly waiting for someone to approach. David felt completely paralyzed, torn between anger at his friends and a strange fascination with how she navigated the space. Finally, taking a deep breath, he approached her. You must be the music teacher?" She smiled, and the smile transformed her face completely. "And you must be the engineer, wondering whether to run away or face the awkward situation your friends created." Her direct sincerity left him speechless for a few seconds. "How did you—" "Your breath changed when you saw me enter, and your voice now has a hesitation that wasn't present in your first question." She extended her hand. "Helen Smith." David stood still for a few seconds, observing Helen's outstretched hand, as if it were an impossible puzzle to solve. The naturalness with which she had identified his embarrassment left him even more unsettled. Finally, he shook her hand, immediately noticing the firmness of her grip and the slightly rough texture of her fingertips, probably from constant contact with piano keys. "David Johnson," he replied, his voice still carrying the tension of discovery. "And you're right. I'm seriously considering running away." Helen laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the heavy atmosphere of the moment. "Well, at least you're honest. That's already a plus." The waiter approached, a young man with an eyebrow piercing and a rock band t-shirt. "Good afternoon. What will you two be having?" "Double espresso," Helen replied without hesitation. "And by the smell coming from the kitchen, you have homemade cinnamon rolls today, don't you?" The waiter seemed impressed. "That's right. They came out of the oven half an hour ago." "Then I'll have a piece. And you, David?" She turned toward him with a precision that surprised him. "Coffee? Regular, just coffee." He was still processing how she had identified the roll by smell amid all the other aromas in the place. When they were alone again, Helen rested her elbows on the table, demonstrating a relaxed posture that contrasted with David's evident tension. "So, tell me about the prank. How exactly did your friends set this up?" David felt his face heat up. They said they found the perfect teacher for me. They said you were smart, elegant." He paused, realizing how his words might sound. "And they omitted a small detail about my blindness." Helen shook her head, but she didn't seem offended. "Let me guess. They thought it would be funny to see your reaction." "Probably." The anger David felt toward his friends began to give way to something more complex. "But you knew." Helen was silent for a few moments, her fingers playing with the strap of her bag. "Let's just say I had my suspicions. When they called me, they explained the situation in a strangely vague way, and when someone says you're exactly the type of someone without ever having seen you two together, there's usually something behind that." The waiter brought their orders, and the aroma of coffee mingled with the sweet scent of the cinnamon rolls. Helen picked up her cup with precise movements, testing the temperature before taking her first sip. David discreetly observed her, noticing how each of her gestures seemed calculated yet natural at the same time. "Can I ask you a question?" David finally relaxed a bit in his chair. "Of course." How do you see things? I mean, when you entered here, you seemed to know exactly where everything was." Helen smiled, cutting a piece of the roll with the side of her fork. "I don't see, David. I listen, smell, feel. This cafe, for example, by the echo of the voices, I know it has a high ceiling and probably exposed brick walls. The smell of coffee was more intense near the counter, which must be right there." She pointed in the correct direction. "And by the way the footsteps echo, the floor must be wooden." David looked around, confirming every detail she had mentioned. "This is amazing." "It's adaptation," she gently corrected. "When you lose one sense, the others sharpen to compensate. It's like when you close your eyes to listen to music better." Outside, the guy with the guitar had switched to a song by Jovan, and the soft melody created an unexpectedly romantic soundtrack for the situation. David found himself truly observing Helen for the first time, not her blindness, but her. The way her hands moved expressively when she spoke, how her head tilted when she was paying attention to something specific, the way her eyes, although unfocused, conveyed an impressive liveliness. "Tell me about yourself," she suddenly said, "and don't give me the edited version you use in social situations. Tell me about the real David." The question caught him off guard. I work in civil engineering. I have a small company with 3 partners. I live in Greenwich Village and—" "That's what you do, not who you are." Helen gently interrupted. "Do you have family?" David hesitated. That was always the complicated part. "I have a daughter, Emma. She's 8 years old." "And the mother?" "She hasn't been part of our lives for 3 years." He took a long sip of coffee, hoping she would catch the hint and not press him further. But Helen was not the type to give up easily. "That must be hard, raising a child alone, working, running a company. When do you have time for yourself?" "I don't need time for myself." The answer came out more defensively than he intended. "Emma is my priority. She's all that matters." Helen fell silent for a few moments, and David had the strange feeling of being analyzed in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. The sound of the guitar continued in the background, now a more melancholic tune that seemed to echo the mood of the conversation. "No," she finally said. "You talk about her like someone on a mission, not like a father." The observation bothered him deeply. "What does that mean?" "It means you've turned into the perfect dad, the absolute protector, but you've forgotten to be David. And I bet Emma feels that." Helen leaned slightly forward. Children can tell when parents are just fulfilling obligations instead of truly living. David felt a growing irritation. This woman who barely knew him was questioning his parenthood. You don't know my situation. You don't know what we've been through. You're right, she calmly agreed. But I can recognize someone who's carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, and I know how that ends, with the world crushing the person. David's phone vibrated on the table, a message from Emma. Dad, Grandma Helen made chocolate truffles. Are you going to want some when you get back? The simple message from his daughter made his heart tighten with a mix of love and guilt. Helen noticed his change in mood immediately. Did she text you? How did you... Your phone vibrated, you tensed for a second and then sighed in a affectionate way. It must be your daughter. She smiled. Does she know where you are? Sort of. I told her it was a work meeting. You lied to an 8-year-old. Helen raised her eyebrows. What an exemplary father. David felt exposed, as if she could see through all his carefully constructed defenses. I didn't want to complicate things. She's still getting used to our life like this. 3 years, David. She's not getting used to it anymore. She's already accustomed. You're the one still trying to control a situation that can't be controlled. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sounds of coffee and street music. David realized that it had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him so directly, without the filters of pity or social niceties he was used to encountering. The silence that settled between them was interrupted by the sound of a child crying at a nearby table. Helen automatically turned her head in the direction of the sound, her face showing a genuine concern that caught David's attention. It's a girl. She must be about 5, she murmured, as if translating the situation for him. She probably spilled something. The mother is nervous. I can hear it in her quickened breath. David looked in the indicated direction and saw exactly what Helen had described. A small girl had knocked over a cup of juice onto the floor, and the mother was trying to clean up the mess while comforting her daughter. The precision of Helen's observation impressed him once again. How do you manage to pick up on so many details? He asked, genuinely curious now. Helen shrugged, turning her attention back to the sugar bread. When you teach music to children, you learn to read much beyond words. Tone of voice, breathing, movements, all of that tells a story. She paused. For example, I can tell you're more relaxed now than when you got here. How so? Your voice has lost that tension from the beginning. You're leaning back in your chair instead of sitting on the edge, and you stopped drumming your fingers on the table. Helen smiled. Besides, you asked me a personal question about myself instead of just responding defensively. David realized she was right. For some reason, Helen's presence had begun to relax him. Maybe it was the direct way she spoke, or the complete absence of pity in her tone. She didn't treat him like a poor soul abandoned by his wife. In fact, she challenged him. And you? He asked, deciding to return the sincerity. Tell me about the real Helen. Well, I already told you that I'm a music teacher. I've been working at a specialized school in Brooklyn for 6 years. She played with the napkin between her fingers. I mainly teach piano, but I also cover music theory and singing. Have you always been a teacher? No, I used to be a professional pianist. I played in bars, restaurants, and some events. Her voice carried a hint of melancholy, but after the accident it was hard to continue performing. David felt a pang of curiosity, but something in her tone stopped him from asking directly about the accident. Instead, he tried a different approach. Do you miss it, playing professionally? Helen was silent for a few moments, her fingers unconsciously making movements that David recognized as if she were playing piano in the air. Sometimes, but I found that teaching has a different reward. When a child manages to play their first complete song, or when someone who never thought they could make music suddenly understands a melody. She smiled, genuinely. It's a unique feeling. Children with special needs, some, but also normal kids who just need a different approach. Helen made air quotes with her fingers when she said normal. Actually, I work a lot with children who have gone through trauma. Music has an incredible therapeutic power. Something in the way she said that set off an alarm in David's mind. A strange feeling, as if there was a connection he couldn't identify. What kind of traumas? Divorce, abandonment, grief. Situations that shake the emotional structure of the child. Helen took another sip of her coffee. They are usually referred to me by psychologists or pediatricians. I do parallel work to conventional therapy. The feeling of familiarity grew, but David couldn't place it in context. Instead, he changed the subject. And your family? Do you have siblings? Parents? My parents live in the countryside in Springfield. I have a younger brother who's a doctor. He keeps trying to convince me to undergo some experimental surgeries. Helen laughed, but there was an underlying tension in her laughter. And you, besides Emma, my mother, Grandma Helen, what a coincidence with the name, lives here in Greenwich Village. My father passed away 5 years ago. He was an engineer too. David realized he was sharing personal information with an ease he hadn't experienced in years. I have a sister in Brasilia, married, with 2 kids. And your ex-wife? Can I ask what happened? David hesitated, fiddling with his empty cup. It was a question he hated answering, mainly because he was never sure how to do it without sounding like a victim or resentful. Sarah is an artist, a painter. She always dreamed of studying in Europe, doing international exhibitions. He chose his words carefully. When Emma was born, she tried to juggle motherhood and art, but she never really adapted. After a few years, an opportunity came up in Paris, a course, important contacts. And she chose art, Helen completed, with no judgment in her voice. She chose herself, David corrected, surprised by the bitterness he still carried in his voice. She said that if she didn't go at that moment, she would never have the chance again. That she needed to discover who she was beyond being a wife and mother. Helen nodded slowly. And you, did you feel like she was choosing between you and her career? It wasn't that simple, David sighed. In fact, it was exactly that way. She said she loved me, that she loved Emma, but that if she didn't pursue her dream, she would end up resenting us for holding her back. And you let her go. I did. He looked out the window, watching the street's activity. I thought it would be temporary, that she would achieve her dream and come back. But she didn't come back. She calls Emma once a month, sends birthday cards, promises visits that never happen. David felt the familiar sensation of fatigue that always accompanied this subject. Emma still asks when her mom is coming back. Helen reached across the table and lightly touched his arm. The gesture was so natural that David didn't even think to pull away. It must be very hard to explain to a child why someone who should love them chooses to stay away. It's impossible, he admitted, because I don't completely understand it myself. The street musician had switched to a song by John Legend, and the familiar melody created a melancholic counterpoint to the conversation. David realized they had been talking for over 2 hours, and the initial resistance had given way to something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a real conversation with an adult that wasn't about work or related to Emma. "Can I ask you something?" Helen said, withdrawing her hand from his arm. "Sure. Why did you come today? I mean, really, it wasn't just because your friends insisted." David thought about the question for a few moments. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe Maybe because Emma made a comment last week about how nice it would be if I had a girlfriend. And what did you say? That we were both fine on our own, that we didn't need anyone else. Helen tilted her head, and she accepted that answer. She looked at me in a way, you know when a child looks at you, as if they know something you don't? David laughed without humor, and said, Dad, you say that, but you get sad when you think I'm not watching. Smart. Very. Sometimes I think she's too mature for her age. David checked his phone again. Actually, I think I need to go pick her up soon. Of course. Helen started to gather her things, but she didn't seem in a hurry. David? Yes? Thank you for not running out when you saw me come in. He watched her for a few seconds, noticing how the late afternoon light coming through the window created golden reflections in her hair. Thank you for not letting me run away, he replied. When they stood up to leave, David offered to walk her to the bus stop, but Helen politely declined, explaining that she knew the area well and had her routes memorized. Before they said goodbye on the sidewalk, she turned. He said to her, Your friends are going. To want to know how it went? Probably. Are you going to tell the truth? David thought about the question, observing her face in the golden light of the late afternoon. I'll say it was unexpected. Helen smiled, and for the first time since they had met, David had the impression that she was a little nervous too. Unexpected can be good, she said, before moving away with her cane, navigating through the crowd on 8th Avenue with an elegance that continued to surprise him. The following week, David found himself thinking about Helen at unexpected moments. During a meeting, with suppliers, while reviewing structural plans, or when he was helping Emma with her homework. Suddenly, he remembered how she had described the cafe's atmosphere, or how her fingers moved, as if playing an invisible piano. On Thursday, when Mark called under the pretext of discussing a project, David knew the real intention was different. So how was the meeting with the teacher? The question came after just 5 minutes of work-related conversation. David was in his office in Greenwich Village, a renovated townhouse he shared with his partners. Through the window, he could see the typical afternoon bustle. In the area, college students and freelancers circulating through the tree-lined streets. It was interesting, he replied, keeping his tone neutral. Interesting how? Interesting bad or interesting good? Mark pressed, and David could hear voices in the background. Probably Frank and Kyle were also eager for the answer. Interesting as in, she's an interesting person. David leaned back in his chair, recalling Helen's warning about telling the truth. Why didn't you guys tell me she was blind? There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by muffled laughter. Oh man, you found out. We thought. It would be funny to see your reaction, Mark admitted, without any hint of guilt in his voice. Funny? The irritation David had felt in the cafe returned with full force. You thought it was funny to put me in an awkward situation with a woman you used as part of a prank. Calm down, it wasn't like that. Now Mark seemed less confident. We really thought you two would hit it off. She's nice, smart. And you thought it would be fun not to mention an important detail? David, man, what's the problem? If she's nice, what difference does it make? The question caught David off guard. All week he had been questioning the same thing. What difference did it make? Helen was smart, funny, challenging in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Her blindness had become irrelevant after the first few minutes of conversation. That's not the point, he finally said. The point is that you used me and used her for a stupid joke. Okay. My bad, man. But tell me something. Are you going to see her again? David fell silent. That was the question he had avoided asking himself all week. I don't know, he admitted. Why not? Because it's complicated, Mark. I have a structured life, responsibilities. "You're scared," Mark interrupted him. "Scared of getting involved with someone again." After hanging up, David stared at the phone. Was Mark right? Was it fear, or was it simply prudence? On Friday, Emma resolved the issue for him. They were at the public market doing their weekly shopping when she stopped in front of a fruit stand and began to smell a pineapple. "Dad, how do you know if a pineapple is sweet?" she asked, mimicking the gesture she had seen other customers doing. "By the smell and the color, Princess. If it's yellowish and smells sweet." "And if you couldn't see the color?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean? If you were blind, like, how would you know?" David looked at his daughter, trying to understand where that question was coming from. "Well, by smell, by touch. Why do you want to know?" Emma shrugged, but continued exploring the fruits with her eyes closed. "Just curious. It must be hard to shop without seeing." They continued walking through the market, and David noticed that Emma kept her eyes closed at various moments, as if she were testing what it would be like to navigate the world without sight. When they stopped at a spice stand, she became particularly interested in the different aromas. "Dad, do you know anyone who is blind?" The direct question made David stop analyzing the spices. "Why do you want to know?" "At school, the teacher talked about inclusion. She said that sometimes we meet people who are different from us, but that doesn't mean they are less capable." David studied his daughter's face, trying to understand if there was any suspicion behind her questions, but Emma seemed genuinely curious. "Actually," he said carefully, "I met a blind person recently, a music teacher." Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? What's she like? Smart? Funny? She can do things that a lot of sighted people can't." "Like what?" David thought of Helen describing the cafe's atmosphere, identifying details he hadn't even noticed. "She can see things in a different way, by sounds, by smells, by touch." "That's cool." Emma seemed fascinated. "Does she play piano?" "She does, and she teaches kids." They continued shopping, but David noticed that Emma remained thoughtful. When they were heading back to the car, she asked the question he had dreaded. "Dad, do you like her?" David almost dropped the bag he was carrying. "What do you mean?" "You changed when you talked about her. Your face got softer." "Softer?" "Yeah, you know, when you relax. Like when we're watching a movie you like." Emma looked at him with that penetrating expression that sometimes scared him. "Do you like her, like you like me and Grandma Helen? Or do you like her like, I don't know, like a man?" The question, asked with the brutal honesty that only an 8-year-old can have, David was left completely speechless. How could he explain feelings he didn't fully understand himself? "It's complicated, Princess." "Is it because of Mom?" "Partly." Emma remained silent throughout the drive to the car. When David was putting the groceries in the trunk, she said, "Dad, I think Mom's not coming back." The statement, made with a calmness that broke David's heart, made him stop what he was doing. "Why do you think that?" "Because she never asks about our life here. When she calls, she only talks about her things in Paris, and when I talk about school or about you, she changes the subject." Emma leaned against the car, looking much older than her 8 years. "I think she's happy there." David knelt in front of his daughter, holding her small hands. "Emma, that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." "I know she loves me, Dad, but sometimes love isn't enough to make someone stay, right?" Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "And that's okay. We're fine on our own, but you don't have to be alone because of me." His daughter's maturity left him speechless. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that he was protecting Emma by keeping her life simple and stable, but maybe she was protecting him too. "You wouldn't mind if I met someone?" Emma smiled, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. As long as she's nice to me and doesn't try to pretend she's my mom. And what if she were different, like the music teacher? Dad, Emma sighed dramatically, if she can teach music to kids while being blind, she's probably braver than we are. On Saturday morning, David picked up the phone 3 times before finally dialing the number Helen had given him at the cafe. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Helen? It's David. From the cafe." There was a brief pause, but he could hear the smile in her voice when she replied, "Hi, David. I wasn't expecting your call." "To be honest, I didn't expect a call either." He laughed nervously. "But my daughter asked some questions yesterday that made me think." "What kind of questions?" "About you, and about me too." "And what did you discover?" David looked out the kitchen window, where he could see Emma playing in the small backyard. I've been too cowardly for the last 3 years." "Courage is something that develops with practice," Helen said gently. "What do you have in mind? Would you like to meet us again? But this time without my idiot friend's prank?" "I would love to. But David..." "Yes? This time, how about you bring Emma along?" The following Sunday, David found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror longer than he would like to admit. Emma had chosen a yellow dress with small flower prints because yellow is a happy color, Dad, and was now looking at him with an amused expression. "Dad, you've changed your shirt 3 times. She's blind, remember?" "Emma..." David sighed, adjusting his light blue shirt for the last time. "It's not about her seeing me. It's about feeling presentable." "You want to impress her," Emma declared, with the typical shrewdness of someone who had been watching her dad behave strangely for days. They had arranged to meet at the farmer's market at 10 in the morning. Helen had suggested the place, explaining that she liked the sounds and aromas of the market, and that it would be an interesting environment to meet Emma. David had agreed, but now, driving down Cantarera Street with his daughter in the passenger seat, he felt an anxiety he hadn't experienced in years. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" Emma fiddled with her seatbelt, a habit she had when she was nervous. "Of course, Princess. If you and Helen become, I don't know, a couple, will she want to live with us?" The question was too complex for a Sunday traffic, but David tried to answer honestly. "I don't know, Emma. I don't even know if we're going to become a couple. We're still getting to know each other. But if you do, can I give my opinion?" "Your opinion will always matter," David assured, parking near the market. "You are the most important person in my life." "And what about Helen? Will she be important too?" David turned off the car and looked at his daughter. "Why all these questions?" Emma shrugged, but her eyes revealed genuine concern. "Because I want you to be happy, Dad. But I also want to make sure our family will continue to be our family." David's heart tightened. For 3 years, it had been just him and Emma against the world. The idea of including someone else in that dynamic was both exciting and terrifying. "Our family will always be our family," he said, holding her small hand. "Nothing and no one will change that." They found Helen near the main entrance of the market, wearing a moss-green blouse and jeans, with the same brown bag slung over her shoulder. She was standing near a flower shop, clearly enjoying the scent of the flowers, when David called out to her. "Helen!" She turned in the direction of his voice, smiling immediately. "David!" And this must be the famous Emma. Emma partially hid behind her dad, but her curiosity was stronger than her shyness. "How did you know it was me?" "By the sound of your footsteps. You're lighter than your dad, and I can hear you're a bit nervous. Quicken breathing." Helen crouched down to be at Emma's height. Besides, your dad talked so much about you that I feel like we already know each other. He talked about me. Emma looked at David in surprise. He said you're very smart, that you like to ask interesting questions, and that you have a smile that can convince anything at all. Helen extended her hand. Nice to meet you, Emma. Emma shook the extended hand, studying Helen with that intensity that sometimes embarrassed David. You really can't see anything? Emma, David began to protest, but Helen laughed. It's okay, David. It's a natural question. She turned to Emma. I can see some things, light, shadows, very large shapes, but not details like faces or colors. Is that sad? Helen thought for a moment. Sometimes I would love to see your dad's face when he gets nervous, or your expressions when you're thinking. But I've also found different ways to see you. What do you mean? Well, for example, I know you're wearing something yellow. Emma's eyes widened. How do you know? By the way, your dad said Emma when you asked me about my blindness. There was pride in his voice, but also a bit of embarrassment. And when a child chooses yellow, it's usually because they want to show joy or make a positive impression. Helen smiled. Did I get it right? You did. Emma clapped her hands, clearly impressed. You're like a detective, more or less. Now how about you help me pick some fruits? I need to buy ingredients for a pie, and you can be my eyes. They spent the entire morning navigating the farmer's market. Helen taught Emma how to choose fruits by smell and texture, while Emma described everything she saw with contagious enthusiasm. David watched them, fascinated by how Helen managed to connect with his daughter. Dad, look at this. Emma had discovered a spice stall and was trying different aromas. Helen can identify everything just by smell. David approached, watching Helen organize small bags of spices with the same precision she probably used to organize sheet music. That's impressive, he admitted. Where did you learn that? Out of necessity. When you live alone and can't visually check if something is fresh or spoiled, you develop other methods. Helen picked up a handful of basil, smelling it deeply. This one was picked this morning. It still has a bit of dew on it. Emma was fascinated. You live alone. You don't have family. I have my parents and my brother, but they live far away. And I have my students, who are kind of a chosen family. Helen paid for the spices. And you, what's life like for you together? It's great, Emma answered immediately. Dad cooks better than most of my friends' mums, and he lets me choose the movies we watch. That's important, Helen agreed seriously. And what else do you like to do together? We go to the park on Sundays, and Dad describes the colors of the kites flying. And sometimes we go to the movies, and he whispers what's happening in the parts that only have images. David noticed that Helen had stopped walking, a strange expression on her face. He describes things to you? Yeah, because I like to close my eyes in the theater sometimes. It feels like an audiobook. Emma didn't notice Helen's reaction. Dad, can I show Helen how we play at the park? Of course, Princess. They left the market and walked to Central Park, which was nearby. Emma ran ahead, eager to demonstrate the game she played with her dad. David and Helen walked more slowly, and he noticed she was quiet. Are you okay? Yeah, it's just... You have a very special relationship. The way you communicate, how he cares for you without being overprotective. Helen hesitated. It's rare to see a dad so in tune with his daughter. I learned through practice. In the first months after Sarah left, I didn't know how to talk to Emma about feelings, about changes. So I started describing the things we saw together. And I found that it created a different intimacy, like a shared narration of your lives. Exactly. At the park, Emma insisted on showing Helen how she could walk with her eyes closed, guiding herself only by sounds and the texture of the ground beneath her feet. Helen encouraged her, giving tips on how to use other senses to navigate the space. "Dad, can Helen come over for dinner tonight?" Emma suddenly asked after an hour of playing. "I want to show her my room." David looked at Helen, who smiled before responding. "I would love to see your home, but only if your dad agrees to let me help cook." "You cook?" David asked, surprised. "I have to cook, and I've developed some interesting tricks over the years." In the afternoon, at David's house in Greenwich Village, Helen explored the kitchen with the same methodical approach she had used in the market. Emma appointed herself the official guide, describing the location of each utensil and ingredient. "Dad, why have you never let me help cook like Helen does?" Emma asked, watching Helen teach her how to tell when the onion was golden by the sound of frying. "Because I always thought it was faster to do it alone," David admitted, watching the two work together on dinner preparation. "Faster isn't always better," Helen commented. "Sometimes the process is just as important as the result." When they sat down for dinner, Emma dominated the conversation, asking questions about what it was like to teach music, how it felt to play the piano, if Helen knew the songs she liked. David noticed that Helen answered each question with patience and genuine interest. "Helen," Emma suddenly said in the middle of dinner, "can you teach my dad to play the piano?" "Emma," David protested. "Why?" Helen asked, curious. "Because he gets stressed sometimes, and music relaxes him. And also because then you both would have something to do together besides talking." The simplicity of the child's logic made both adults laugh. "What do you think, David?" Helen asked. "Would you like to learn?" David looked at the two most important women who had recently entered. His life, one who had always been there, and the other who was just beginning to be part of it, changing her perspective on everything. "Why not?" he said, surprised by his own answer. When Helen was getting ready to leave, it was already night. Emma hugged her with a warmth that surprised David. "Can you come back another day?" "If your dad wants, I would love to come back." At the door, while Emma was saying goodbye at the gate, Helen touched David's arm. "Thank you for today. It had been a long time since I felt part of a family, even if just for a few hours." "Thank you." Emma didn't stop smiling all day. "And you?" David thought about the question. "I didn't stop smiling either." As Helen walked away down the street, Emma ran back. "Dad, I liked her." "I did too, Princess." "Do you think she liked us?" David looked in the direction Helen had gone, still able to hear the rhythmic sound of her cane on the sidewalk. "I think so, Emma. I think so." The following 2 weeks established a routine that David hadn't planned, but it seemed to have emerged naturally. Helen began visiting them on Saturdays, always bringing something special, simple sheet music to teach Emma, ingredients to try new recipes, or stories about her students that made the girl laugh until her belly hurt. On one of those June afternoons, while a typical winter rain drummed against the windows of the house in Greenwich Village, Helen was teaching Emma to play a simplified version of Little Butterfly on the small keyboard that David had bought. The living room, once dominated only by the sofa, the television and a few scattered toys, now had an improvised musical corner. "No, Emma, don't force your fingers. The music has to flow like a conversation." Helen guided the little girl's hands over the keys. "Now try again, but this time imagine you're telling a story." David was in the kitchen making coffee, but he watched the scene through the slightly open door. Helen's patience with Emma was infinite, and the way she managed to explain complex musical concepts in a language an 8-year-old could understand constantly impressed him. "Dad, come listen," Emma called him when she managed to play the complete melody. "I did it!" "It sounded beautiful, Princess." David approached, but He noticed that Helen was strangely quiet. "Is everything okay, Helen?" "Yes, it's just—" She hesitated, absent-mindedly running her fingers over the keys. "Emma has a very natural musical talent. The way she feels the rhythm, how she memorizes the melodies. That's good, isn't it?" "It's wonderful, but it also reminded me of something." Helen turned to him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "David, do you remember if Emma ever had any kind of music therapy?" The question caught David off guard. "Music therapy? Why do you ask?" "It's just that she has some reflexes, some reactions to music, that are typical of children who have been exposed to music therapy techniques." Helen played a few soft notes. "The way she breathes when she's focused on the music, how she associates emotions with specific chords." David felt a strange sensation in his stomach. "Well, after Sarah left, Emma went through some tough times. She had nightmares, episodes of anxiety. The pediatrician recommended some complementary therapies." "What kind of therapies?" "Child psychologist, some meetings with a specialist in abandonment trauma." David tried to remember the details. "And yes, I think she had music therapy too." "Why?" Helen was silent for a few moments, her fingers continuing to play softly. Emma had become distracted with a coloring book on the coffee table, but David noticed she was paying attention to the adults' conversation. "Which hospital or clinic provided this support?" "At New York Hospital in Pediatrics. Dr. Mark Silver was the responsible doctor." "Why all these questions?" Helen's expression subtly changed. "David, I worked at New York Hospital 3 years ago. I was part of a pilot music therapy program for children with emotional traumas." The world seemed to stop for a few seconds. David looked at Helen, then at Emma, who had put down her book and was watching them with curiosity. "You mean that— Dad, what's happening?" Emma approached, sensing the tension in the air. Helen took a deep breath. "Emma, do you remember going to the hospital when you were younger, to talk to doctors and do some activities?" Emma nodded slowly. "After Mommy left, I didn't really like going there." "And do you remember someone who played piano with you?" Emma's eyes widened. "The piano lady. She was really nice, but I could never see her face properly because I was focused on the keys." She looked at Helen with a growing expression of recognition. It was you?" Helen nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "It was me, dear." David sat heavily on the sofa, trying to process the information. You helped my daughter 3 years ago and never said anything?" "I wasn't sure at first. Emma was very small, and I work with many children." Helen turned to him, her voice filled with emotion. "But when she started playing today, when I saw how she reacted to the music, I was certain." Emma ran to Helen and hugged her tightly. "I remembered your voice. You sang those songs that made me less sad." "I remember, yes. You especially liked Little Butterfly and Ring Around the Rosie." Helen returned the hug, her voice choked. "You were one of my most special students." David abruptly stood up, walking to the window. The rain had intensified, creating a grey curtain that mirrored the confusion in his mind. "Why didn't you tell me?" He turned to Helen, a mix of confusion and irritation in his voice. "Since the first meeting at the cafe, you knew who I was." "No, David, I really didn't know. Emma always talked about Daddy, never said your full name, and you—" Helen stood up too, leaving Emma on the sofa. "You never mentioned that your daughter had undergone music therapy." "Because I didn't think it was relevant. It was only a few sessions 3 years ago." "A few sessions?" Helen looked surprised. "David, Emma had music therapy with me for 6 months. Twice a week. That was over 40 meetings." David felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. 6 months? That can't be right." "Dad," Emma approached, concerned. "Why are you angry?" "I'm not angry, Princess. David crouched down to her level, but his voice still carried tension. "I'm just surprised." Helen walked over to them, her hands searching for the back of the sofa to orient herself. "David, can I explain what happened in those sessions?" "I need a minute." David left the room, heading to the kitchen where he pretended to be busy organizing the already clean dishes. His mind drifted back 3 years in time. The period after Sarah's departure had been a blur of doctors, therapists, desperate attempts to help Emma process the maternal abandonment. He vaguely remembered the music therapy sessions, but at that time he was so overwhelmed with work and medical care that he had delegated many of the details to his mother or the temporary nanny. Helen appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully through the space she had already memorized. "David, how is it possible that I don't remember you?" he asked without turning around. "If you worked with my daughter for 6 months, how is it possible that we never met?" "Because you worked a lot. The sessions were always in the morning during the week. The one who brought Emma was an older lady. My mother," he completed, the realization dawning slowly. "She was very caring, always waited outside the room, knitting or reading." Helen moved closer. "Sometimes you would call in the middle of the session, and I could hear Emma say, 'It's Daddy,' with so much affection in her voice." David finally turned to look at her. "And you? Did you remember me?" "Not as a physical person, but I knew you through Emma's stories. I knew you worked a lot, that you were raising her alone, that you read her stories every night." Helen smiled sadly. "I knew you were her hero. I don't feel like a hero right now." "Why?" "Because apparently I was so lost back then that I didn't pay enough attention to one of the people who helped my daughter the most." Helen extended her hand, lightly touching his arm. "You were doing the best you could with the resources you had. Being a single dad isn't easy, especially when you're processing your own pain." "Do you think Emma remembers everything?" "Probably not the specific details. But she remembers the feelings, how music helped her express things she couldn't say." They returned to the living room, where Emma was playing alone on the keyboard, trying to reproduce one of the melodies Helen had taught. "Emma," David sat next to his daughter, "do you remember why you went to the hospital back then?" "Because I was very sad, and sometimes I had nightmares." Emma stopped playing, looking at her father. "But Helen, the piano lady, helped me understand that it was okay to be sad sometimes." "And how did she do that?" "She said that music had a place for all feelings, that it could be sad or angry or happy, and that all of that was normal." Emma looked at Helen. "You said I was brave because even when I was sad, I kept trying." Helen moved closer again, sitting on the floor near the keyboard. "You were brave, Emma, and you still are." "Helen," David said, his voice calmer now, "thank you for helping her back then." "You don't need to thank me. It was my job." "No, it was more than a job. From what I'm seeing now, you really cared." Helen nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear. "Emma was one of the children who impacted me the most. When we finished the sessions, I found myself wondering how you both were, if she was okay." "And now you know," Emma said, with the typical simplicity of a child. "We're fine, and you came back into our lives." David looked at the two of them, his daughter, and the woman who was changing his perspective on many things. The coincidence seemed impossible, but perhaps it wasn't a coincidence. Perhaps it was just life offering a second chance for all of them. "Helen," he finally said, "would you like to have dinner with us tonight? I really mean it, not as a visitor, but as someone who is part of our story." Helen smiled, and David realized it was the first time he had seen her truly emotional since they met. "I would love to," she replied. "After all, it seems our story began long before I imagined." July arrived with the typical cold of a New York winter, and with it, a revelation that would completely change the dynamic that David, Emma, and Helen had built. It was a rainy Thursday when David's phone rang during an important meeting about a business project in downtown Manhattan. David Johnson, the voice on the other end, was female, with an accent he recognized immediately. "Sarah?" He stepped away from the conference table, excusing himself from the clients. "Where are you calling from?" "From JFK Airport. I just arrived." David felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "What do you mean you arrived? You're in the US." "Yes, I need to see you and see Emma. It's important." "Sarah, you can't just show up after 3 years without warning." David walked through the office hallways where the meeting was taking place, trying to keep his voice low. "Please, David, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I made mistakes, serious mistakes." Her voice was different, less confident, filled with a sadness that David didn't remember hearing before. David closed his eyes, trying to process the situation. In 3 years, Sarah had only communicated with them by phone or messages. She had promised visits that never happened, sent gifts that always arrived late. Emma had. He had stopped asking when his mother would return over a year ago. "Where are you staying?" "In a hotel in Greenwich Village, boutique villa hotel. Is it near your house?" Our house had become your house. David noticed the slip, but didn't comment. "I need to pick Emma up from school first, and think about how to explain it to her." "David, please. I know I don't deserve it, but I need my family back." The phrase echoed in David's mind all the way home. My family. As if nothing had changed, as if 3 years of abandonment could be erased with a single sentence. When he arrived at Emma's school, she immediately sensed something was wrong. "Dad, you look like you've seen a ghost." Emma settled into the passenger seat, observing David's intense expression. "Did something happen at work?" "No, sweetheart, but I need to talk to you about something important." "Is it about Sarah? Did you two fight?" "No, it's not about Sarah." David parked in front of the house, but didn't get out of the car right away. "Emma, your mom is in Brazil." Emma froze completely for a few seconds. Then, in a very small voice, she asked, "Does she want to see me?" "Yes, she wants to see us, both of us." "Why?" The question was asked with a maturity that broke David's heart. Why did she come? Back now? "I don't know, sweetheart. She said she wants to explain some things." Emma looked out the window at the house. Her house. The place where she had built a new life with her dad. "Dad, do I have to see her?" David turned fully to look at his daughter. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I dreamed about this so much when I was younger, but now I don't know anymore." "Why don't you know?" "Because we're fine, Dad. We're happy. And what if she wants to change everything again?" David reached out, wiping away a tear that was rolling down his daughter's face. "No one is going to change our life without us deciding together, okay? Nothing will happen that you don't want." They entered the house, and David immediately called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, David. How was your meeting?" "Sarah, something happened. Can you come over? I need to talk to you." "Sure. Did something serious happen?" David looked at Emma, who was sitting on the couch hugging a pillow. "It's complicated. Can you come now?" Sarah arrived in 20 minutes, wearing a thick navy blue wool coat and carrying a bag that, by the smell, contained homemade brownies. She had developed the habit of always bringing something delicious when she visited. "What happened?" she asked as soon as David opened the door. "Emma's mom is back. She's in São Paulo." Sarah stood still for a few seconds, processing the information. "Emma's mother? What do you mean she's back?" "She arrived today from the airport. She wants to see us." Sarah entered the room where Emma was waiting. The girl ran to hug her, as had become customary. "Sarah, my mum is back," Emma said, her voice muffled against Sarah's coat. "I heard. How are you feeling?" "Confused and a little scared." Sarah sat on the couch, pulling Emma to sit beside her. "Scared of what?" "That she wants me to go away with her. That she won't like who I am now. That—" Emma hesitated. "What, dear?" "That she won't like you. And then Dad will have to choose." David felt his heart tighten. He sat in the armchair facing the two, trying to find the right words. "Emma, look at me." He waited until she raised her eyes. "No matter what happens, you are my priority, always. And Sarah," he looked at her, "Sarah is part of our life now." "But what if my mum doesn't understand that?" "Then we'll have to help her understand," Sarah said calmly. "Emma, do you want to see your mum?" Emma thought for a long time. "I do, but I want you and Dad to be with me." "That might not be possible at the first meeting, sweetheart," David explained gently. "Why?" "Because your mum might want to talk just to you first, to explain why she was away for so long." Sarah touched David's hand. "Touched. David, do you want me to leave, so you can sort this out as a family?" "No!" Emma protested immediately. "Sarah, you're family too." David looked at Sarah, seeing his own confusion reflected on her face. 3 months ago, his life was simple and predictable. Now he was navigating waters he didn't know how to navigate. "Sarah, you are part of our life," he finally said. "But I don't know how this will work with Sarah here." "I understand," Sarah replied, but her voice carried a sadness she was trying to hide. "Maybe it's better if I give you some time to sort things out." "No!" Emma quickly stood up. "Sarah, you can't leave just because my mum is back. That's not fair." "Emma, sometimes adults need to resolve complicated situations," Sarah began. "But I don't want you to go," Emma interrupted, tears running down her face. "You helped me when I was little. You're helping Dad be happier. You are part of our family." David stood up and hugged both of them. "No one is leaving, okay? We'll figure this out together." The phone rang, interrupting the moment. David answered reluctantly. "David, it's Sarah again. Can you come to the hotel, or can I come there? I really need to talk to you both." David looked at Sarah and Emma. "Sarah, can you come here in an hour? Emma is home and, well, there are some things we need to discuss." "Sure, I'll be there." "David." "Yes? Thank you for having me. I know I don't deserve it." After hanging up, David felt. Emma sat down again. "She'll be here in an hour." "Dad," Emma said, her voice steady despite the tears, "I want Helen to stay, at least at the beginning." David looked at Helen. "Do you want to stay?" Helen hesitated. "Is that a good idea? Maybe it would be easier if—" "Helen," David interrupted, "for 3 months you've been a part of our lives. You know, Emma, you know our routine, our history. If Sarah wants to come back into our lives, she will have to understand that some things have changed. What if she demands that I leave? Then she will find out that she can no longer give orders in my house." David replied, surprised by his own firmness. Emma smiled for the first time since they had arrived home. "Dad, you've become braver." "Yeah, Princess, I think I have." They spent the next hour preparing the house and themselves for a meeting that none of them knew how it would go. Helen helped Emma choose an outfit, something that shows who you are now, not who you were 3 years ago, while David tried to organize his own conflicting feelings. When the doorbell rang, the 3 of them were sitting in the living room, united in a silent determination to face whatever was to come together. David opened the door and found Sarah standing at the entrance. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair and grey tones that hadn't been there 3 years ago. She wore stylish clothes, but there was a fragility in her posture that David didn't remember. "Hi, David." Her voice was almost a whisper. "Hi, Sarah. Come in." When she entered the living room and saw Emma, her eyes filled with tears immediately. "My God, how you've grown!" Emma remained seated next to Helen, watching her mother with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Hi, Mom." Sarah then noticed Helen's presence and stopped, confused. I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company." "Actually," David said, his voice firmer than he expected, "Helen is not company. She is part of our family." The silence that settled in the room was almost palpable. Sarah stood near the door, alternating her gaze between David, Emma, and Helen, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. Helen remained seated, but David could sense the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on the fabric of her pants. "Family?" Sarah repeated the word slowly, as if testing its meaning. "David, can I speak to you alone?" "No." The response came from Emma, who stood up from the sofa with a determination that surprised all the adults present. "If you want to talk to us, you can talk in front of Helen." Sarah looked at her daughter as if she were seeing her for the first time. "Emma, dear, these are adult matters." "Mom," Emma interrupted, "I'm 8 years old now, not 5, and Helen is important to me and Dad. If you can't accept that, maybe you shouldn't have come back." David was impressed by his daughter's maturity. In 3 years, Emma had developed a strong personality and her own opinions, traits that Sarah clearly hadn't expected to encounter. Sarah approached, trying to hug her daughter, but Emma stepped back. "First, explain to me why you left and never came back, and why you're back now." Helen discreetly stood up, touching David's shoulder. "Maybe I should—" "No," David said firmly. "You stay." Sarah finally sat down in the armchair in front of the sofa, her hands trembling slightly. "Emma, I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be." "I'm not angry, Mom. I'm disappointed." Emma sat down again next to Helen, but kept her eyes fixed on her mother. "You promised you would come back for my 6th birthday, and for my 7th birthday too. I know, my daughter, Sarah began to cry. "Things in Paris didn't go as I expected." "What kind of things?" David asked, his voice controlled but tense. Sarah looked at Helen again, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of a stranger during this intimate conversation. "Is it really necessary for her to stay?" "Helen is not a stranger," Emma said, before David could respond. "She's the piano lady who helped me when you left. Remember I was doing music therapy? It was with her." Sarah's eyes widened, looking at Helen with new attention. You worked with Emma at the hospital?" "I did," Helen confirmed calmly. "And now I'm part of her life in a different way." "In what way? Different?" David took a deep breath. "Helen and I are getting to know each other romantically." The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Sarah fell silent for several minutes, processing the information. "How long?" she finally asked. 3 months, David replied. 3 months? Sarah stood up abruptly. "David, were you waiting for me to leave the scene to start a new life?" "Waiting for you to leave the scene?" David's voice rose an octave. "Sarah, you left 3 years ago. You abandoned your family to pursue your dreams." "I didn't abandon. I asked for time to—" "For what?" David interrupted. "To discover that you didn't want to be a mother? To realize that life in Paris was more interesting than life here with us?" Emma stood up again, positioning herself between her parents. "Stop fighting." The firm tone of the girl made both adults fall silent immediately. "Mom," Emma turned to Sarah, "why did you come back now, really?" Sarah sat down again, drying her tears with the back of her hands. Because things didn't go as I imagined. The course I went to take turned out to be a sham. The professor who was supposed to help me showcase my work, he just wanted to take advantage of me." "Take advantage how?" Helen asked gently. "He said he could help me get exhibitions, important contacts, but in exchange he wanted—" Sarah couldn't finish. David felt a pang of compassion, but also irritation. "And you accepted?" "At first, yes. I was desperate. I had spent all my savings on the course and the apartment. But then—" She shook her head. "Then I realized I was completely losing myself. And then you decided to come back home," Emma completed, her voice emotionless. "Yes. I realized I had made the biggest mistake of my life, that you were everything I really wanted." Helen leaned slightly forward. "Sarah, can I ask a question? Did you come back because you discovered you want us, or because you found out you have nothing left in Paris?" The direct question caught Sarah off guard. What does it matter? The important thing is that I came back." "It matters a lot," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "Because if you only came back because you had nothing there, you'll leave again when something better comes along." The maturity of his daughter made David feel both proud and sad. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to analyze their parents' behavior like this. "Emma, it's not like that." Sarah tried to get closer to her daughter again. "Then how is it, Mommy?" Emma crossed her arms. "Are you going to stay? Forever? Even if another opportunity comes up in another country?" Sarah hesitated. A small hesitation, but one that everyone in the room noticed. I want to stay. I want to rebuild our family." "Which family?" David asked. "The family you abandoned 3 years ago, or a new family you want to create now?" "Our family, David. Me, you, and Emma." "And Helen?" Emma asked. "Helen?" Sarah looked at the other woman, clearly struggling with the situation. "Helen can be part of your lives, but not our family. Family is me, you, and your dad." Helen stood up calmly. "Maybe I should leave. Let you two sort this out." "No!" Emma shouted, running to hug Helen. "You can't leave. You promised you wouldn't leave." "Emma, sometimes things change," Helen began, but her voice was choked. "Nothing has changed." Emma turned to Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy, you left. Daddy was sad for a long time. I was sad for a long time. And then Helen came along and now we're happy. You can't just come back and undo everything." Sarah looked shocked by her daughter's reaction. "Emma, I'm your mother." "Being a mother isn't just having a baby," Emma replied with devastating frankness. "Being a mother is staying, it's caring, it's being present. Helen has done more for me in the last 3 months than you have in 3 years. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Sarah was openly crying, David was struggling with his own conflicting emotions, and Helen was trying to stay strong for Emma's sake. "Maybe," Helen finally said, "we all need some time to process this. Sarah just arrived, Emma is confused, David is trying to balance so many things at once." "You're right," David agreed. "Sarah, where are you staying?" "At the Villa Hotel in Greenwich Village. How about we meet tomorrow, you, me, and Emma, to talk more calmly?" Sarah nodded, wiping her face. "And her?" She looked at Helen. "Helen will continue to be part of our lives," David said firmly. "If you want to return to Emma's life, you'll have to accept that." Sarah stood up to leave, but before she reached the door, she turned around. "Emma?" "Yes, Mommy?" "I love you. I've always loved you. And I know I made mistakes, but do you still love me?" Emma thought for a long moment before answering. "I love the mommy who gave birth to me. But I don't know the person you are now, and I don't know if I'll like her." The brutal honesty of the answer made Sarah leave the house crying. David closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. "Dad," Emma approached him, "do you think I was too harsh on her?" David hugged his daughter. I think you were honest, and sometimes honesty hurts. Helen. Emma turned to the woman who remained standing in the middle of the room. Are you really going to leave? Helen knelt down to be at Emma's height. What do you want me to do? I want you to stay. I want you to continue being part of our family. Helen looked at David over Emma's head. And you, David, what do you want? David stepped closer to both, wrapping them in a hug. I want our family to be defined by who chooses to stay and love, not just by biological ties. So, Emma said, her voice muffled against her father's chest, we're a family even if Mommy doesn't understand that. We're a family because we choose to be a family, Helen replied, finally allowing her own tears to fall. Outside, the July rain continued to fall, washing the streets of New York and symbolically preparing the ground for a new family configuration to find its way through the complexities of love, abandonment, and redemption. August arrived with an emotional intensity that none of the three were prepared to face. In the 2 weeks following Sarah's return, a tense routine was established, meetings between mother and daughter always supervised by David, difficult conversations that stretched for hours, and nights when Emma asked questions David didn't know how to answer. Helen had partially stepped back, visiting only once a week, and always when Sarah was not present. The situation left everyone walking on emotional minefields, trying to protect Emma while navigating their own wounds and expectations. It was a grey Thursday when Sarah made the phone call that would change everything. David, I need to talk to you. Alone. Her voice on the phone carried an urgency different from previous conversations. About what? About our daughter. About her future. Sarah paused. About Paris. David felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean about Paris? Meet me at the cafe where you met Helen in an hour. The cafe with conversation was less crowded than the first time, perhaps due to the time or the typical gloomy weather of a New York winter. David arrived first and chose the same table where he had met Helen months ago, an irony that did not go unnoticed. Sarah appeared on time, wearing an elegant grey coat that highlighted her refined style developed in Paris. But her eyes revealed an anxiety that contrasted with her polished appearance. Thank you for coming, she said, sitting across from him. Sarah, get straight to the point. What do you want? She took a deep breath, nervously fiddling with her purse strap. I got an opportunity in Paris. An important gallery wants to represent my work. David felt a mix of anticipation and relief. And it's the chance I've always waited for. International exhibitions, serious collectors, the possibility of finally living off my art. Sarah, but I want to take Emma with me. The words fell like a thunderbolt in the tranquil cafe atmosphere. David was silent for a few seconds, trying to process what he had just heard. You want what? She is my daughter, David. I have rights. Rights? David's voice rose dangerously. You abandoned your daughter for 3 years, and now you talk about rights. I didn't abandon her. You left Sarah. You left a 5-year-old crying at the door, promising to come back for her birthday, for Christmas, for any special occasion, and never kept a single promise. Sarah lowered her eyes. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? You destroyed your daughter's trust. She spent months in therapy because she didn't understand why her mother left. That's exactly why. Sarah leaned forward, trying to sound convincing. That's why I need to make it up to her. I can offer her a different life in Paris. International schools, culture, languages. David laughed bitterly. And you think Emma wants that? Have. You talked to her about leaving her life here, her friends, her school. She's a child, David. Children adapt. She is no longer the child you left behind. David leaned back in his chair, trying to control his rising anger. Emma has her own opinions now. She has a life built here. With you and your girlfriend, Sarah said with a tone that mixed resentment and disdain, with people who chose to stay in her life, who were there during the nightmares, the anxiety attacks, the questions about why her mother didn't come back. Sarah was silent for a few moments, fiddling with the napkin. David, you can hate me as much as you want, but Emma is my daughter, and I will not let her be raised by a stranger. Helen is not a stranger. She took care of Emma when you weren't here. Exactly. She took advantage of my absence to take my place. No one took your place, Sarah. You abandoned your place. The discussion was attracting the attention of other customers. David realized he needed to change his approach before the situation got completely out of control. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, forcing a calmer tone. I want Emma to come with me to Paris for 6 months initially, so she can see my life there, see the opportunities I can offer her. And what if she doesn't want to go? She will want to. Once she understands the possibilities. And what if I say no? Sarah looked him directly in the eyes for the first time during the conversation. Then I will file for joint custody, and I will argue that Emma needs a maternal figure, not a substitute you arranged because you were lonely. The veiled threat made David feel a chill in his stomach. He knew Sarah well enough to know she wasn't bluffing. Would you do that? Use our daughter in a legal battle? I would do anything to have my family back. But you don't want our family back, Sarah. You want a new family on your terms that fits into your new life. Sarah stood up abruptly. You have until the end of the week to decide. Emma comes with me willingly, or this will go to court. And Helen? Helen will have to leave my daughter's life, one way or another. After Sarah left, David sat alone in the cafe, trying to organize his thoughts. The sound of the street violin that used to bring good memories now felt too melancholic. He called Helen. Hi, David. How did the conversation go? I need to see you, now. I'm teaching until 6, but I can... Helen, it's urgent. Sarah wants to take Emma to Paris, and she's threatening to go to court. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a few seconds too long. Where are you? At the cafe where we met. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Helen arrived, David immediately noticed that she had cancelled her classes to meet him. She was still wearing the formal outfit she wore to teach, a white blouse and navy skirt, but her face revealed concern. Tell me everything, she said, sitting at the table. David recounted the conversation with Sarah, including the veiled threats about a legal battle and the demand that Helen leave Emma's life. When he finished, Helen remained silent for several minutes. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking that maybe she has a point. David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. What do you mean? Maybe Emma needs her biological mother. Maybe I'm really getting in the way. Helen, no. David, think about it. Sarah is Emma's mother. She has legal rights, biological ties. Helen nervously fiddled with her cane. And what about me? What am I? A girlfriend of a few months who got too involved in your lives? You know it's much more than that. Do I? Or have I convinced myself of that because I wanted to be part of a family? The question caught David off guard. Helen, you're not serious. I am. Maybe I've been too involved. Deluded, thinking she could replace her mother. You never tried to replace anyone. You simply were present. Helen shook her head. But Sarah came back. And regardless of the mistakes she made, she is Emma's mother. David leaned forward, taking Helen's hand. And you? What are you to Emma? I don't know anymore. You are the one who taught her that music can heal wounds, who helped her express feelings when she didn't even know she had them, who showed her that blindness is not a limitation. David's voice grew more intense. You are the one who taught me that it is possible to love again without fear. Helen gently withdrew her hand, But maybe it's not enough. Enough for what? To justify splitting a family, to justify a legal battle, to justify putting Emma in the middle of a war between adults. David leaned back in his chair, frustrated. So you're giving up, just like that? I'm being realistic. You're being cowardly. The accusation made Helen visibly withdraw. Maybe, but sometimes being cowardly is the same as being prudent. They fell silent, listening to the sound of traffic on 8th Avenue and the distant music from a street musician's guitar. David realized he was losing two important people at the same time, and that he might not be able to save either of them. "Helen," he finally said, "are you really leaving?" "I think I need to." "And Emma? How am I going to explain to her that another important person in her life is leaving?" Helen stood up, her eyes filled with tears she was trying to control. "You will explain that sometimes people make difficult choices thinking of the well-being of those they love. But that's not what's best for Emma, not for me either. Maybe not, but it's the only way to avoid turning this into a war where everyone loses." Before leaving, Helen turned one last time. "David? Yes? Thank you for letting me be part of your family, even if for a short time." As she walked away down 8th Avenue, David was left alone with the question he didn't want to ask: how to explain to an 8-year-old that the adult world is sometimes too cruel, even when everyone claims to be acting out of love. The hardest conversation of David's life took place on a rainy Friday in August in the living room that had become the heart of the small family he, Emma, and Helen had built. The keyboard David had bought was still in the corner, Helen's sheet music scattered across the coffee table, and the faint smell of cinnamon that always lingered in the air after she cooked still permeated the space. Emma came home from school excited, as she always was on Fridays, but stopped abruptly when she saw the expression on her father's face. "Dad, what happened? Did someone die?" "No, Princess, no one died." David sat on the sofa, pulling Emma to sit beside him. "But we need to talk about some important things. About Mom and about Helen, and about us." Emma settled in, hugging one of the cushions, a habit she had developed when sensing serious conversations. "Is Helen coming for dinner tonight?" David felt his heart tighten. "No, Emma, Helen isn't coming for dinner with us anymore." "Why?" The question was asked in a small voice that made David question if he was doing the right thing. "Because sometimes situations get too complicated for adults to resolve, and someone needs to make difficult decisions." "What kind of decisions?" David took a deep breath. How to explain to an 8-year-old the complexities of emotional blackmail, legal battles, and the power games adults play when claiming to protect those they love. "Your mom came back, and that changed a lot in our lives." "And so, can't we just keep being happy because Mom came back?" The question, posed with the simple logic of a child, highlighted the absurdity of the situation the adults had created. "Your mom wants you to go to Paris with her." Emma fell silent for several seconds, processing the information. "To live." "Initially for 6 months, so you can experience her life there. And you, are you going too?" "No, Princess, it would just be you and her." Emma abruptly stood up, walking to the window. The rain created irregular patterns on the glass, and she traced the drops with her fingers as if trying to decipher a secret message. "I don't want to go to Paris," she finally said without turning around. "Why not?" "Because my life is here. My friends are here. My school, my teacher, my room." She turned to look at her father. "You are from here. Helen is from here." "Emma," Helen decided, "to step back from our lives for a while." "Why?" The question came laden with a pain that cut through David's heart. "Because she thinks it's better this way. With your mum back, things have become complicated." "But I didn't ask Mum to come back." Emma shouted, tears starting to stream down her face. "I didn't ask her to ruin everything we built." David stood up and went to his daughter, kneeling in front of her. "Emma, your mum loves you. She's just trying to—" "Trying what?" Emma interrupted him. "To fix something she broke? To pretend nothing happened? To take me away from everything I love?" His daughter's emotional maturity continued to surprise David. At some point in the last 3 years, without him fully realizing it, Emma had grown and developed a deep understanding of relationships and consequences. "And what if I say no?" Emma asked. "What if I say I don't want to go to Paris?" "Your mom might try to use the law to take you anyway." "And you? Will you fight for me?" The question was simple, yet it carried the weight of the world. David looked into her eyes. Emma looked at her father and saw absolute trust there, the certainty that no matter what happened, he would be by her side. "I will fight for you until the end of the world, princess." "Then why did you let Helen go?" The question caught David completely off guard. "What do you mean?" "You said you would fight for me, but you didn't fight for Helen. Why?" David realized he didn't have a satisfactory answer. In fact, he had accepted Helen's decision to step away because, on some level, he was also afraid. Afraid of a custody battle, afraid of complicating the situation further, afraid of not being strong enough to protect everyone he loved. I thought it was better not to complicate things." "Dad," Emma sat on the floor in front of him, speaking with a seriousness that didn't match her 8 years. "You always taught me that when you truly love someone, you fight for that person, even when it's hard." "Yes, I taught that." "Then why aren't you fighting for Helen?" David fell silent, forced to confront his own cowardice. For months, he had convinced himself that he was protecting Emma and Helen by accepting Sarah's demands. But his 8-year-old daughter had seen through the rationalization and identified what was really happening. He was giving up without a fight. "You're right," he finally admitted. "So what are we going to do?" David looked at his daughter, his partner, his accomplice, his teacher of courage, and felt a determination he hadn't experienced in a long time. "We're going to fight, princess, for both sides of our family." "How?" "First, we're going to call Helen and tell her that we don't accept her decision to give up on us. And if she says she doesn't want to come back, then we'll have to convince her that it's worth fighting for." "And Mom?" David thought about the question. "We'll talk to your mom, for real. We'll explain that she can be part of your life without destroying the life you've already built. And if she doesn't accept it, then we'll show her that some things aren't negotiable." Emma smiled for the first time in days. "Dad, can I ask a question?" "Of course." "Why do adults complicate things that should be simple?" David laughed, hugging his daughter. "Good question, princess. I think it's because we forget that love isn't about control. It's about caring. And did you forget that?" "For a while, yes. But you reminded me." They spent the afternoon planning how they would approach Helen and Sarah. Emma insisted on being part of all the conversations. "Dad, it's about my life. I have the right to speak." And David realized she was right. For 3 years, he had made decisions trying to protect Emma, but maybe it was time to include her in the process. At 6 in the evening, they called Helen. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. "Hello? Helen, it's David. I'm here with Emma, and we need to talk to you." "David, I already explained that." "Helen." Emma took the phone from her father's hands. "You said that when you truly love someone, you fight for that person. Did you lie?" The silence on the other end lasted almost a minute. "Emma, it's more complicated than that." "No, it's not. It's simple. Do you love us or not?" "Emma." "Yes or no, Helen." "I love you both. Very much. Then stop being a coward and come home. The brutal simplicity of Emma's logic cut through all the rationalizations and fears that Helen had built up. After a few more minutes of conversation, she agreed to have dinner with them on Sunday. On Saturday, it was time to confront Sarah. David and Emma went together to the hotel where she was staying. The conversation took place in the lobby, a neutral environment that forced everyone to maintain civility. "Sarah, Emma has some things to say to you," David began. "Mom," Emma addressed Sarah directly, "I'm not going to Paris." "Emma, dear, you don't even know." "I'm not going to Paris," Emma repeated more firmly, "but you can stay here." Sarah blinked, confused. "What do you mean? You can live in New York. You can be my mom here, where my life is. Emma, I have a career in Paris. And I have a life here, and Dad does too, and Helen does too." Emma leaned forward in her chair. "Mom, if you really love me, you won't make me choose between you and everything else I love." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. There were tears, accusations, moments of anger and moments of tenderness. But in the end, mediated by Emma's relentless honesty and David's renewed determination, they reached an agreement. Sarah would stay in New York for 6 months, gradually rebuilding her relationship with Emma. If at the end of that period she wanted to return to Paris, she could do so, but Emma would remain in New York with David. And Helen would be part of the girl's life, regardless of Sarah's opinion on the matter. On Sunday, when Helen arrived for dinner, she found a family gathered again. Not the same family that had temporarily separated, but a redefined family, strengthened by honesty and the courage to fight for what truly mattered. "Helen," Emma said when they sat at the table, "you came home." "I did," Helen confirmed, her voice choked, "and this time no one is going to make me leave again." "Not even if I decide I don't like you?" Sarah asked, but there was a lightness in her voice that hadn't existed before. "Especially if you decide you don't like me," Helen replied with a smile. "Because then I'll have to win you over too." And that was how a family learned that true love isn't about possession or control, but about the courage to fight for those we choose to protect. The wisdom of accepting that some families are built not only by blood, but by the deliberate choice to stay, to care, and to love, even when it is difficult.